Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week's theme of going on a journey looking at a track from the band Vanum. I didn't know what I was getting in for here, and I just literally a second ago before hitting record saw out of the corner of my eye Spotify says Vanum is an atmospheric black metal outfit with roots in New Mexico and New York. And it just feels appropriate that I could not escape black metal this week. I don't know if this is necessarily going to be a track that I feel is going on a journey given the genre, but black metal has surprised me in the past, so I'm going to do what I always do, go in with an open mind and see what the track tells me. Let's dive into Eternity. Ooh, that is a crunchy sound. It's interesting. I can hear a little bit of bass in here. A really flat, muddy bass kick. I don't think it's bad in particular. I've heard worse in black metal, and I think it's fine for their production. I mean, this is pretty much the halfway point here. By my metric, if they're wanting to go on a journey, we gotta make some change. Interesting production shifts, given the guitars are much quieter now than they were. We've circled back to this idea we've heard previously. This was our opening riff, actually, because that was the crunchy sound right there. Those are fast offbeat hits on the snare. There's an overwhelming weight here that primarily comes from the atmosphere, the instruments sitting outside the metal bands. So those are strings on the outside. And see, it's choices like that that make me want to dive into lyrics. Anytime that I hear an oddity in the music that I feel doesn't fit, my first thought is, why? Why did they include that there? Um, and I'm sure it makes more sense. This isn't the first time that I'm like, oh, this doesn't really fit with what's been going on. And then I read lyrics, even outside of the concept of this channel in my own casual listening. I'll hear something that I'm like, oh, what was the point of that? Go check out some lyrics, like, oh, it ties into, the themes as a whole. You really got to engage with the entirety of the track. So the shift to 25 minutes of wind and firewood crackling, I have no idea how to reconcile that against the rest of the music. There's nothing musically that leads to that, but I'm going to wager the lyrics explain that a little bit. Maybe they don't. Maybe it's just a cool sound they wanted to end it on. Who knows? But it's certainly not explained in the music. On the topic of going on a journey, here's another one that just kind of doesn't click with me. However, I think I have a strong reason for this one at least. I don't click with black metal to begin with. I find it to be very repetitive, and it is a genre of nuance. I find a lot of black metal to sound the same 16th note picking, 16th note bass kicks, or alternating 16th note bass and snare with growling over top of it, or sometimes more nasally, higher pitched harshes. What I think of it when I think of the traditional black metal harsh. And that's black metal music to me. No bass usually. It was nice to hear some bass in here, but it was still buried deep down in there. Um, Especially when it comes to this atmospheric black metal, though, it's the nuance of the notes, it's the progression of the chords, it's the dyads, um, and they're really putting a lot of weight on what two notes our guitars are playing at any given time. But the rhythmic stagnation of the genre just I find it such a huge hurdle to get over. And the production usually makes it difficult for me to engage with the emotions of our dyads as well. I can usually appreciate them from a distance, but rarely have they struck me in a way that I find to be emotionally engaging. It's the production of it all and the intensity of it all that tend to connect with me first and foremost, and those elements are typically similar from song to song and even band to band. It's the reason I think why it's the more eclectic, experimental, and avant garde approaches to black metal that tend to stick with me more so than anything more traditional like this. Um, and so this might feel big or epic or like a journey for some of you, especially more seasoned black metal listeners. But to me, it's a wall of sound with a moment of harmonized guitars by themselves for about a minute, followed by a wall of sound. And since I picked up that we repeated that, our second time hitting the wall of sound at least started the same way our first did, it feels cyclical to me and less journey like. Journey to me is more of a straight line destination, going somewhere different from where you started. As usual, my disclaimer this week is that art is subjective. Even the definition of a journey can be subjective, as I've stated earlier this week. Even just driving an hour out of your way to experience a unique restaurant, maybe a mom and pop shop in a city you've never been before, can feel like a journey, just as much as driving across your country could or going to a different country. It doesn't have to be epic and grand to be a journey. That just typically is what I think of when I think of the word. But again, subjective elements come into it. I think this overview is going to be rather quick. I've already leaned into a lot of what's going on here. There are uh, alternating bass kick and snare throughout all of this. The cymbal work gets playful in some areas, but for the most part, it's the aggression of the snare that shines through more than anything else. The cymbal work, specifically the ride, does cut through the mix, but the bass kick doesn't. It is this muddy plopping sound almost. It's an interesting choice to go for the bass kick, but I think given all of the lower end aggression we're already hearing in the EQ and the song as a whole, I don't think having more pronounced bass kick would have really added too much to it, and pulling it out of the way, I think, is probably the best way to ensure that the song as a whole doesn't end up muddy as well. As I stated during the reaction, it's an aesthetic choice that I think works fine for this, but is not going to be something I would choose to do in many other contexts. It is one of the interesting things I think about more extreme metals is deciding how to mix and produce your music when you're hitting wall of sound levels like this. Um, because the traditional way of ensuring that everything can be heard and is prominently mixed in a way that sounds as close to, especially in the case of a drum kit, as close to acoustic as is possible, that's not going to work. It's a completely different mindset, and I really appreciate the talent that goes into odd choices like this. Like I said, the plopping drum kick, bass kick in a vacuum is a weird choice, but it works here. It's an inspired decision that takes somebody working outside the box a little bit to find. Interestingly, our snare is on off beats throughout a lot of this, but it's a really quick tempo, so it just kind of feels like it drags a little bit. It's a little bit behind everything else, but it's honestly on the end of every beat. It's because our bass kick is on the downbeat, but the bass kick is hard to hear. So it's that decision kind of it adds something to the song that feels simultaneously like dragging and rushing at the same time. I don't know. It's an interesting choice. I don't think it matters much. I'd be surprised if I found a lot of people in the comments were like, "Yeah, I felt that too." Once again, it's a decision that in a vacuum hyper focused on is quite odd, but in the context of the whole, if you take the entire painting in like most people do when they listen casually, um, it's going to be one of those details that you don't notice and might not even pop up at all in your mind while you're listening. Um, And then, like I said, the cymbal work can get fun at times, but for the most part is overshadowed by that very powerful snare sound. The guitars take prominence in a lot of this with their dyads. We occasionally hear some nice counterpoint between them, but for the most part, they're focused entirely on working together to create the emotional resonance through their chord progressions presented by their singular notes working in tandem, which is where we get our dyad, one note per guitar. The bass has a couple of neat ideas I heard a couple of times, some moving concepts, but for the most part they're drowned out. I'm going to be honest, I didn't hear the bass in every single section, and uh, I don't have much to add on to it other than hearing it a couple times when there's some space in the guitar work and I can kind of peer through the song and find the bass at the bottom, kind of see what it's doing, but it was only, I think the number of times I heard it probably be counted on one hand. The guitars I mentioned, the dyads. One thing I want to point out real quick is that we have this interlude in the middle, and I think this is a perfect case of exploring what the guitars are doing if you're confused by dyads, chord progression, counterpoint, and harmony. what they're doing here in isolation isn't that different than what they're doing in any other part of the track. You can clearly hear that they're playing different notes. They tend to change notes at the same time, but do not necessarily go in the same direction, or even in the same direction in the same interval. If one goes up half a step, the other one could go up a whole step, or a whole and a half, or two whole steps. And that will end up with different intervals, different distances between our pitches, and that creates different dyads, which all have different emotions to them. And I think it's where the atmospheric part of their description comes from. Not every black metal band is interested in exploring this level of complexity in their harmonic aspect. Now, it is an interlude, though, and I don't really know what to feel through it. As usual, black metal just, there's something about the sound of it that doesn't, I have a tough time connecting with the emotional aspects of it in the way that I do other types of music. It kind of felt just meandering. And honestly, I was wondering when we were going to move on to the next section. This was a lead in into it. And unfortunately, we let ourselves back into where we were and to a cycle. Now, the title of the track is Eternity, and it's possible that the concept of cycles going on forever is the purpose of the song. In fact, I wouldn't mind that, especially if we had ended the track in another interlude. Even if the interlude had faded away into our campfire in the woods kind of thing going on, but to imply this sort of cyclicality to it. As it stands, we just have an ABA, which feels finite. We have a book ending. It's symmetrical. So I don't know. I mean, as usual with black metal, just I don't. I have such a tough time with this genre. I don't know why you guys keep throwing it at me. um, I think it's gonna wrap it up. This feels a bit anemic, a bit undercooked as far as an analysis goes. But I mean, that's the song. Kind of did feel like an eternity to me, especially when I picked up on the fact that we were repeating our A section, and I was like, oh, we got to go through this again. I hope something changes, and of course, nothing did. We were consistently black metal from start to finish, aside from our 1 minute interlude, which was a nice reprieve, a nice bit of contrast sonically, but I was kind of hoping we were going to go somewhere else. I was going to be surprised, like with, was it Agalok earlier this week? Um, I think so. Started out as pretty traditional black metal and then shifted into some really weird ways throughout the end of it. Um, that's kind of what I was hoping for. But they sort of delivered on just straightforward black metal aspect throughout. And for fans of the genre, I'm sure that works fine. But for me, oh, this ain't my cup of tea. I'm going to hit some lyrics, we're going to see what's going on there, and then we're going to wrap this up. This track is about seeking godhood and knowledge, which I feel like, aside from the first wave satanic elements of black metal, is something that I do seek or do find crops up time and time again within this genre. There's always this element of uh, what is past our physical plane and seeking it out. Sometimes I think in a more, I don't know if I necessarily want to say positive and negative, but I think that's what I'm going to work with because I can't think of another word for it. A positive way of reaching a spirituality and a negative way of obtaining the power of another realm or the beings of another plane. And in this case, we're specifically talking about godhood. The opening stanza speaks about having seen this on the periphery. I've seen the faces of God through the eyes of the mask, hidden from time, shielded from man, gilded secrets caught in glinting reflections, arcane power guarded and denied, meanings abstracted, and totems erected. The idea that this secondary layer of existence where the gods dwell and where real power lay has always been on the horizon of human experience. It's always been something we can kind of perceive but have never had a strong look at. Through the next couple of stanzas, we look at what uh, what kind of things this character has gone through in his pursuit of this, and what he aims to do. He wants to wrangle in his imagination and utilize it to see beyond what the eye can. He wants to reach a sort of nirvana, um, uh, the heightening of consciousness. And finally, at the end, after a series of ritual, we end with the stanza, ripping hellfire, rise from the depths, golden light flood from the chalice of death, dagger through the veil, pierce the firmament, tear off the mask, blade of eternity, drain the heavens, bathe in the blood of knowledge, and live forever. And a lot of this seems to just be implying that he has reached the point where he can pierce the veil that leads to this other side. He can rip off the mask and see clearly these deities in this power, and that this blade of eternity will drain the heavens and transfer that knowledge and power to him. As he states, I will bathe in the blood of knowledge and live forever. He has achieved a godhood and an immortality paired with infinite knowledge, which once again is another topic that I think is interestingly seen a lot in black metal is obtaining the information of everything, being able to understand more than anyone else has. It's this concept of superiority that comes through in intellectual perception. It's not physical strength, it's mental strength, it's knowledge. Uh, I don't know what that means. I just know that the more black metal I listen to, the more I see stories about obtaining infinite knowledge. And again, I don't know why that's a topic with run through, but it is. Um, as for this track, musically, do I hear any of these themes? No, I don't. But I'm not gonna put that weight on the song. I mean, I've said it a couple times today, and I've said it a lot in the past. I can't connect with black metal. It's possible, again, that somebody more familiar with the genre does feel these themes in the nuanced movement of the guitars, but as usual, all I hear is aggression. I hear the wall of sound. I try to engage with the dyads the guitars are playing and the emotions that they're trying to explore with those chords, and I just can't. There's a hurdle there that 3 years later now, give or take, y'all have been exposing me to black metal, I still can't quite climb. So, this might be a journey of a song. These lyrics might line up with the emotions explored in the track. I'm the wrong person to tell you if any of that's true or not. All I hear is sound. Those are my thoughts on Vanum's Eternity. Let me know what you thought down in the comment section. Give me your perspectives, opinions, if you agree with me or disagree, any of that. Throw it down there in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree that takes you to this menu right here. You can find links to my music, a link to the Discord server, ways to support the channel, and so much more. Above that, if you could like, subscribe, and ring the bell, I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up both for this week's theme and for today. We will be back tomorrow, though, to explore some brand new music, looking at either tracks off of an album that dropped tomorrow or a music video that drops tomorrow. Or I suppose this week. So the albums usually drop on Fridays. Music videos are usually Wednesday to Friday. There's less uniformity to that. But regardless, it's all going to be music that's new, that just came out recently. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.